Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in. It's my pleasure to be here, continuing to read and discuss the book Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart. This is book 2 of the series. It's subtitled Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again. And yesterday on the broadcast, we were talking about the word Vatican and what it literally means. Old hag and hill of divination or hill of prophecy. Now, backing up just a little bit for continuity purposes, the last few words on page 120 in the book, if you're following along, it says, it is curious, too, that coins minted in the Vatican City from 1955 to 1965 under 3 different popes have the inscription on the reverse side in Italian, Sit del Vaticano, which wisdom, according to Revelation chapter 17, verse 9, has shown us means city of prophecy. But what kind of prophecy is quote-unquote Vatican symbolic of? In the Bible, when the word Vatican is used, it has been associated with false prophecy and false prophets who prophesy for hire or for pay. Here's how it is used in the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, chapter 6 and verse 12, King James Version. And it gives it in Greek, and it translates, quote, "And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him," unquote. In other words, this was a false prophet, and he was a hired prophet. Now, thus, the association of the word Vatican and prophecy is of a sorcerous kind. This is even confirmed by the Catholic online encyclopedia New Advent and can be found in the Catholic Church's Latin Vulgate Bible under Nehemiah chapter 6. And as we have seen from the 2 dictionary definitions a few paragraphs above, the word annus, or the suffix of Vaticanus, in Latin means old woman. Vaticanus, therefore, is a combination of 2 words that gives us, quote, the old woman of prophecy, unquote. And as I will show in the next chapter, this woman of Bible prophecy is also a church. Now that ends our discussion of Revelation, of the chapter 17. We'll go on now to chapter 18. It is entitled, A Scarlet-Clad Woman on a Scarlet-Colored Beast. Begins with a quote from Revelation chapter 17, verses 1, 3, and 5. Shows a picture of a beast, a 7 heads and with 7 heads and 10 horns, and a woman scantily clad riding it and carrying a golden cup elevated in her hand. And here's the passage. Come hither, and I will show thee the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And upon her forehead was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, unquote. Again, Revelation 17, chapter 17, verses 1, 3, and 5. Now, the author begins the chapter by saying Revelation 17, verses 1 through 5, opens in dramatic lines. Quote, Come hither, and I will show unto you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Verse 3, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy. Verse 4, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. Verse 5, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Unquote. We will focus on verses 1, 3, and 5. These symbolisms, the colors, the metaphoric woman, her quote-unquote fornications, and the name written so boldly across her forehead are but additional hieroglyphs of Antichrist. But what is the real identity of this woman with the inscription, Mystery Babylon, written boldly across her forehead? Why is she adorned in colors of scarlet and purple? What is the plot of this drama? And on what stage will the scene be played out? The book of Revelation, chapters 12, 17, and 18, tell the tale of two women. One is dressed in pure white, representing the purity of the true faith and doctrine of the Christian church. This pure woman is brought into view in Revelation chapter 12 and is portrayed as completely committed to Christ, her lover. But another woman is alluded to in the very next chapter of Revelation, that of chapter 13, but not specifically mentioned. The name of this quote-unquote other woman is given 4 chapters later in the book of Revelation chapter 17. This second woman represents an opposite picture to the first, for she is said to be utterly unfaithful, even to the extent of having numerous affairs with the great men of the earth. What then is the meaning of these strange symbolisms and of the scarlet-colored beast carrying the scarlet-clad woman with the appellation Mystery Babylon across her forehead? The identity of this prophesied mystery woman has long fascinated and puzzled Bible readers. Much curious learning has been employed, and upon the analysis of this much curious learning has been employed upon the analysis of this celebrated passage of Scripture. At one time it was said by the crafty Spanish Jesuit priest by the name of Alcazar, who we've talked about extensively on this program, in 1604, and is today taught in many Protestant churches, that this prophecy concerning Antichrist applied to Nero. And what we're talking about specifically is the teaching that is known famously as preterism. Preterism, or this idea that Antichrist is a figure of ancient history and is no longer a factor in the world, that he was destroyed centuries, or rather millennia ago, and that Antichrist has already fallen, and that the world need not worry about Antichrist, need not be concerned, need not study Antichrist, because that's all over with. That's called preterism. And it presumes that Nero was the biblical Antichrist and that his dynasty ended. And it says the idea had currency for a time, but was replaced with yet another heresy, reintroduced by one Porphyry, who vainly tried to apply the prophecy to the Greek king Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Okay? So those who just don't believe that it was Nero, the Jesuits just threw up another option, another candidate for Antichrist, way off in the distant past, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now, both of these teachings fall flat on their face. They are easily refuted. Now, the author continues. Again, This later interpretation is held by an even larger number of Protestants, but an even more disfiguring interpretation of the prophecy is that taught by futurists, the majority of the Christian world, who say that Antichrist is yet future and will only come after the Christians are all raptured away, leaving the ungodly and the Jews. So here we have juxtaposed, one against the other, the preterist view, that the Antichrist was Nero, and if you don't like that choice, you can say that it was Antiochus Epiphanes, both of whom are figures of the distant past, no longer a factor, not to be a concern of Christians. And then we have the futurist view that is juxtaposed up against the preterist view. The futurist view is that which I held for the majority of my life, that Antichrist was not a factor in the world until in the future, and that Antichrist was to be anticipated to come at the very end of time, but only then after the Protestants or the Christians were raptured out of the world and carried off to heaven to be with Christ. And so literally, in either view, preterism or futurism, Antichrist was not a factor, not something that Christians should burden themselves with. Now, why do you suppose that the Jesuits taught so many different options for us to believe in, all of which render any consideration about Antichrist relatively moot for those who call themselves Christians? There's a strategy, and that is to destroy any notion that it is the papacy who fulfills the prophecy of Antichrist, the here and now papacy, the historical papacy, and the future papacy. You see how that works? If you believe in a past Antichrist that is gone, the Antichrist is not a factor in your life. If you believe the futurist view that Antichrist won't come until the end of time, and besides, the Christians will all be gone anyway, no need to worry about Antichrist. No need to consider it. When the truth is that Antichrist has been with us all along. And the author's going to make this vividly clear to us. Again, it says, this latter interpretation is held by an even larger number of Protestants. Speaking of the preterist view that it was Antiochus Epiphanes who fulfilled the prophecies of Antichrist. But an even more disfiguring interpretation of prophecy is that taught by the futurists. The majority of Christian world believes in the futurist view, and they say that Antichrist is yet future and will only come after the Christians are all raptured away, leaving the ungodly and the Jews. Now, I hope that I've done a good job of showing you the strategy behind these three erroneous teachings. They all have their purpose in rendering any consideration of Antichrist, any concern about Antichrist, any study about Antichrist entirely moot. And how convenient for the Roman Catholic Church to have proffered these three options and literally distracted the entire Christian world away from any consideration of the biblical Antichrist. It's not even allowed to be talked about in a lot of churches. It's just they just say the book of Revelation is allegorical. It's hard to comprehend. There are so many different interpretations, it just frustrates us. Let's not dwell on it. How convenient for the papacy. Now the author continues. He says, but the first two of these heresies, the preterist options, the first two of these heresies of interpretation have long been scotched. And the latter, that is futurism, is easily refuted. And I've done it repeatedly on this program, even with the help of Nicholas Arthur, and even Richard Bennett alluded to it. He condemned the futurists. We didn't get into that discussion too much with Richard, but we will on a future broadcast. Now, we'll continue. It says, it is clear that Nero does not fulfill the key requirements of Antichrist. As to Antiochus Epiphanes, he fails the test too. Those who make Antiochus Epiphanes the Antichrist rely on a prophecy in the book of Daniel concerning, quote, the abomination of desolation, unquote, which they say was fulfilled in the year 168 BC by the anti-Christian king Antiochus Epiphanes, who placed an idol upon the altar of God in the temple of Jerusalem. This, some claim, was the setting up of the abomination of desolation on the altar, defiling God's temple. That Antiochus Epiphanes could not be the Antichrist is seen in two simple facts. Firstly, Antichrist was to exist until the end of time, when he, she, or it was to be, quote, destroyed by the brightness of the Lord's coming, unquote. Antichrist, who was to come out of and after the fall of the Roman Empire and not before. Antiochus Epiphanes died in 164 BC, yet over 160 years later, Jesus Christ was still predicting that, quote, the abomination of desolation, unquote, was yet future. Jesus said to his disciples, quote, but when ye see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, then let them that be in Judea flee into the mountains, unquote. Mark chapter 13, verse 14. And to confirm that this was the same abomination of desolation mentioned in the book of Daniel, Christ said, quote, abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, unquote. Mark chapter 13, verse 14. Thus it must be clear to anyone with a modicum of intelligence that Antiochus Epiphanes came more than 160 years too soon. Moreover, the Apostle Paul tells us that Antichrist would be in existence until the end of time, and will only be destroyed by the breath or the power of the Lord when he returns. Secondly, Antichrist was to persecute the Christians. Quote, it would wear out the saints of the Most High, unquote. See Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. It would persecute the Christians and not the Jews, it says. Moreover, Antichrist was to, quote, sit in the temple of God and not in a Jewish temple, as is falsely taught by preterism and futurism. Antichrist was to be a Judas, a professed Christian, and not a Greek or Arab. For we are told Antichrist would, quote, sit in the temple of God, unquote, pretending to be a friend of Christ and a Christian. See 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 4. Now, I would like to stop and interject that there is a vast and growing crowd of Christians who are more and more convinced, erroneously as possible, that Antichrist will be an Arab. And I get email from my listeners all the time talking about videos that are on the internet, particularly those produced by a man by the name of Walid Shubat. Walid Shubat is an acquaintance of mine. He's Catholic. He is Roman Catholic. And though he has all sorts of love for the lost Jewish people and claims that they have a right to their land, as charitable as he seems toward the Jews, he is preaching a false doctrine, another futurist version, that Antichrist is going to be a Muslim. And it's simply not so. The overwhelming evidence of the Bible and history preclude that possibility. It is the papacy. And right now I'd like to make reference once again to a book that we read on this program a long time ago, The Papacy is Antichrist, by Protestant reformer for pity's sake, I've forgotten his name just now. James A. Wiley. The Papacy is Antichrist by James A. Wiley. W-Y-L-I-E. You'll find that on my website, inquisitionupdate.org, and you can read it. It's a very short read, most powerful, and it uses Scripture to back up what he says. And it's simply impossible that Antichrist will be an Arab or a Muslim. As sincere as Walid Shubat is, and all of those who preach this idea, they're incorrect. They're wrong. Just another diversion so that God's people will not consider the possibility that it is the papacy. Now, continuing. As already pointed out, says the author, all the theories of the Antichrist also identify this system, the mystery woman, the quote-unquote beast, and the quote number of the beast, unquote, as, quote, equivalent to be one and the same power. With Protestant, no less than Roman Catholic expositors, it has been an especial favorite. Almost all the eminent men among the latter have concurred in adopting it, unquote. Now, Antichrist is that woman upon the scarlet-colored beast. This woman, Antichrist, according to Revelation chapter 17, is a church and was to exercise both temporal and spiritual sway, for she sits or is enthroned upon many waters. For instance, the nations and the peoples of the world. The woman's dress is also most interesting, and the specificity of the colors mentioned indicates that they are given for the purpose of identification, which we shall shortly prove to be a correct assumption. Why do we say Antichrist is a church? Consider the use of the symbolism of a woman in Revelation chapter 17. The Bible habitually uses the harlot or adulterous woman to represent a church when it goes a-whoring after other gods or adopts false doctrines. Thus the prophet Isaiah, asking concerning Jerusalem, the capital of the ancient church of God, quote, how is the faithful city become a harlot, unquote, Isaiah chapter 1 verse 21. And Jeremiah said also of Israel, quote, thou hast played the harlot with many lovers. Jeremiah chapter 3:1. Likewise, the prophet Hosea warned, quote, though Israel, that is the church of God in the Old Testament, played the harlot, let not Judah offend, unquote. Hosea 4 verse 15. Why do we say Antichrist is a church? Consider the use of the symbolism of a woman in Revelation 17. The Bible habitually uses a harlot or adulterous woman to represent a church when it goes a-whoring after other gods or adopts false doctrines. Thus, the prophet Isaiah concerning Jerusalem, the capital of the ancient church of God, said this, how is the faithful city become a harlot? And the prophet Jeremiah said of Israel, thou hast played the harlot with many lovers. And likewise the prophet Hosea warned, though Israel play the harlot, let not Judah offend. Therefore, the word harlot in Revelation 17 designates not only a church, but a corrupt one. The word great on the forehead of the woman denotes the flagrancy and the openness of her sins and corruptions. Thus, Mystery Babylon represents an unfaithful or corrupt church that is full of mysteries. The true church is always espoused to one husband, Jesus Christ, as the Catholic Church itself even confirms, quote, "The woman is the church, because, as Revelation chapter 12, verse 17 tells us, quote, the rest of her offspring are those who bear the witness to Jesus, making them Christians," unquote. But this woman of Revelation 17, on the other hand, holds promiscuous commerce or promiscuous relations with the nations and the rulers and the great men of the world. Plus, she adopts the customs and the practices of all pagan religions. Now, to even emphasize what this author has just told us, as we so often discuss here on Inquisition Update, if you look carefully at the vestments, the rituals, the traditions, the articles of the priests, they are all collected from an assortment of pagan religions of antiquity. And the Roman Catholic Church admits this, even in their own encyclopedia. And this is virtually why the Roman Catholic Church also calls itself the Universal Church. It is a religion that appeals to all religions because it is an eclectic mix of all religions. And it's clearly visible. Anyone who takes the time to study, as I said before, the customs and traditions and rituals and practices of the Roman Catholic Church, they find bits and pieces of every occultic or ancient pagan religion. And it's true. When she calls herself universal, she means it. And now you know why. Now, the author continues, to prove the term harlot is typical of a church, consider the words of this learned author. Quote, "In the visions of the apocalypse, on the one side we behold a woman clothed with the sun, which is Christ, and treading on the moon, and having her brows encircled with 12 stars, the diadem of apostolic faith. Here is a mother, and her child is caught up to heaven. On the other side we see another woman, arrayed in worldly splendor, enthroned on many waters, and having on her forehead the name Mystery, Mother of Abominations of the Earth. As the first woman, the bride of Christ, the holy city, the New Jerusalem, represents the faithful church, so the second woman, the harlot, the great city Babylon, represents a faithless church. The question now is, what church?" Unquote. And this quote was taken from Christopher Wadsworth, Doctor of Divinity, Canon of Westminster, Lectures on the Apocalypse, Critical, Expository, and Practical, a second edition, published in London, and this is from pages 287, 381, and 384. Now, it was also proposed that the woman dressed in scarlet and bedecked with jewels in Revelation 17 represents an unfaithful or corrupt church. Are these results confirmed by the facts? Now, the author gives us several bullet points, and we'll go through them each one at a time. The first one talks about the symbolism of a woman. First, the woman in white. This represents the body of Christ, remember? White is a sign of her purity. In Bible prophecy, whenever God wished to represent his pure, faithful Christian church, he used the symbolism of a woman dressed in white. For example, Revelation chapter 19, verse 7 and 8. Quote, "Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor to him, For the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife has made herself ready. And to her was granted that she be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. For the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints." Unquote. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 31 and 32 says, quote, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church." Unquote. And Matthew said in chapter 9, verse 14 and 15, quote, "Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples fast not? And Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then they shall fast." Unquote. Thus, the woman of Revelation chapter 13 in white is Christ's bride, the true church of Christ. But what about the other woman of Revelation 13 and 17 and 19 verse 2? This other woman, the second woman, is called a whore, or a harlot, and is not dressed in white, but in scarlet. This is very important, the symbology of these two women, one dressed in white and the other dressed in scarlet. And scarlet characterizes this woman. It's not just a random choice of color. It has spiritual significance that we're going to get to in the next bullet point. He's going to talk now about the symbol of an impure woman or a harlot, a prostitute or a whore. In the Bible, when the church was in apostasy or became corrupt, it was compared to a loose or impure woman. See Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 1 through 3 and verse 6. Quote, "But you played the harlot with many lovers. You have polluted the land with your whoredoms and with your wickedness. You hadst a whore's forehead. You refused to be ashamed. The Lord said also unto me, Have you seen that which backsliding Israel has done? She has played the harlot." Unquote. When Israel became unfaithful, God gave her, and that is the nation of Israel, a certificate of divorce, and sent her away because of her adulteries. See Jeremiah chapter 3 and verse 8, where it says, quote, "Whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, and I had put her away, and given her a bill of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also." Unquote. Both Israel and Judah fell into idolatry. They were pagan images. They worshiped by pagan traditions. They worshiped on a pagan day. They completely apostatized. And God called them harlots, both of them. Now, what is the symbolism of the scarlet-colored clothing? This is important. This, too, has great significance, says the author. Scarlet, which comes from the Persian word, if I can pronounce it, I will, and you can see the similarity with the word scarlet. Sakurlat. It's the Persian word, and it is a bright hue of the color red with a slight hint of orange. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, sins are described as scarlet and red like crimson. Remember the passage? Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though your sins be as crimson, they shall be white as wool. That's the reference that is made to the scarlet color is significant in the Bible. It gives us the interpretation of the prophecies. It's so important that we use the Bible to interpret itself, and this is how it's done. Now, thus, the symbolism of scarlet is used here in the sense of sinning in flagrant and scarlet fashion, unquote, like the proverbial, quote, scarlet women. Now, this is exactly where we get the term, the red light district, or scarlet women, always indicative of prostitution. It comes from the Bible. It comes from this scarlet harlot of Revelation chapter 17. Now, he gives another quote. He says, quote, since the beginning of time, red has been associated with prostitution, the world's oldest profession. Rahab, the prostitute of biblical times, tied a scarlet rope outside her door to help the Israelite spies identify her house. Later, in red light districts around the world, prostitutes come to implement a variation of Rahab's identifying signal. The prostitutes of old were required to wear a piece of red in public to signify their status. While Hester Prynne, the protagonist in Nathaniel Hawthorne's epic novel The Scarlet Letter, was branded with a scarlet badge of shame for her crime of adultery, historically a woman wearing red clothing against her skin was considered immoral. This color clearly, therefore, represents the character, seductive, and shameless alliance of the woman of Revelation 17, for it is said of her that the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. Scarlet represents the sin of adultery, idolatry, fornication, spiritual fornication, whoring after other gods. We saw Israel do it, we saw Judah do it, and now the Christians have a scarlet harlot of their own. Now, the other bullet point. The author's going to talk about the symbolism of the beast on which the scarlet woman rides. A beast in Bible prophecy is used as a symbol of a political power or a kingdom, as clearly shown in Daniel chapter 7, verse 17. Quote, these great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth, unquote. These kingdoms were known in history as the Babylonian Empire from 605 or 606 BC to 539 BC, and it was depicted as a lion. Then it was succeeded immediately by the Medo-Persian Empire, which ruled from 538 BC to 331 BC, and it was typified by the bear. Remember the bear that was raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth? That was the Medo-Persian Empire. The third is the Grecian Empire, and it ruled from 331 BC to 168 BC, and it was typified by a winged leopard. The Roman Empire, from 168 BC to 476 AD, was typified by the dragon-like beast. That was the fourth and final empire on the earth, according to Daniel's prophecy. Quote, thus he said, the fourth beast, the Roman Empire, shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces, unquote. See Daniel chapter 7, verse 23. Thus, the beast on which the woman sits represents the temporal or the civil power by which she is supported. And let me just clarify this a little bit in your mind. This is a union of church and state. This woman, we've already proven, is a woman, a church. And she represents the temporal or the civil power which she supports. That is, the beast represents the temporal or the civil power, in other words, the government by which she is supported. Remember, in the vision, the woman or the church is riding the beast, and if you're riding the beast, you're obviously controlling it, right? I mean, that's the very purpose for riding a beast, isn't it? Not to go helter-skelter or randomly wherever the beast wants to go. No, you climb aboard the beast in order to control it. Well, the beast is a government, a civil and temporal power. It is these kings that arose in history, the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and finally the Roman Empire, that which is depicted by the beast with the woman controlling it. It's a union of church and state. Now, writes Bishop Newton, quote, "The beast, therefore, upon which the woman rideth, is the Roman government in its last form, and this all must acknowledge is the papacy," unquote. This from a bishop has clearly identified that this represents the papacy. The last bullet point the author makes, he's going to talk about the symbolism of many waters on which this whore sitteth. The waters which thou sawest, where the whore, that is the woman, sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Revelation chapter 17, verse 18. Quote, "And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth," unquote. What does this mean? Clearly, this woman, this church, sits on or controls a vast number of the earth's inhabitants, for she sits on peoples and multitudes and nations of different tongues, unquote. The expressions in this passage, sits on or sitteth on, signify either a position of dominance or influence or both. So there you have it in clear prophetic terms in the Bible that this church is also a city, and it reigns over the multitudes of the earth. It's a global church. It sits on many waters, and the waters, it is told us, represents people and multitude and nations of different languages. In other words, this church, this woman, this city reigns over the kings of the earth, and they rule over the people of the earth. Now, what are her true colors? Revelation chapter 17, verse 3, 4, and 6 says, quote, "And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration," unquote. As mentioned earlier, there are those scholars who would have us believe that by the word woman in Revelation chapter 17, the prophet John meant the nation of Turkey, which they say, quote, "was drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus," unquote. But it must be clear to anyone with a modicum of intelligence that this interpretation is forced. It's contrived. In other words, once again, to give yet another option to take away the onus away from the papacy, the only entity on the planet that fulfills this prophecy. That the papacy is here indicated in Revelation chapter 17, verse 3, 4, and 6, is evident by the woman, a church, in scarlet colors, signifying not only her official apparel, but also her centuries of bloodshed. Her dress of purple is symbolic of the priestly livery, or clothing worn at Rome. Who does not know that scarlet and purple are the very colors of the papacy? According to Haley's Bible Handbook, the scarlet color of the woman and the beast is the color of the papacy. Quote, the papal throne is scarlet. It is borne by 12 men in scarlet. The cardinals' hats and robes are scarlet. Unquote. That, again, from Henry H. Haley in his book, Haley's Bible Handbook, printed in Grand Rapids, Michigan by Zondervan Publishing House, 1927, 65, and 1776. See it on page 732. The Historian's History informs us, the other work, The Historian's History, informs us, quote, the white bandeau or diadem borrowed from the East, became the distinctive sign of the ruler, whilst formerly the purple raiment, which is the vestments and the stately clothing, had been the sole sign. Verse 6, volume 6, page 435. In other words, white had been replaced by purple and scarlet. This is a historical record of purple and scarlet marking the Roman Catholic Church. Now, here's a special note. He continues, he says, I'm going to have a comment about this, but he says, on October 31st of 1999, at the signing of the Joint Declaration on Justification by Faith between the Roman Catholic and the Lutheran World Federation churches in Augsburg, Germany, the Roman Catholic leaders wore the colors of scarlet and purple. Dressed in scarlet red was Cardinal Edward Cassidy, president of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. Bishop Walter Casper, secretary, Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, was also wearing purple, whereas the leaders of the Lutheran Church were in black. For example, Reverend Christian Kraus, the Lutheran World Federation president, who was seen in this photograph in the book, seated on the left of the picture at the website given. And here we have signing a mutual agreement between the Lutherans, those who are the product of Martin Luther's Reform, the Protestant Reformation, now seated at a peace table with the Church of Antichrist wearing black, a sign of penitence and subservience, while the Roman Catholic representatives of this signing were wearing their traditional Antichrist colors, scarlet and purple. And what is even more significant about this is the date when this diabolical signing took place. October 31st of 1999. What do we know took place on October 31st of 1517 was the date when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Church, launching the Protestant Reformation. And so the Protestant Reformation began on October 31st, and it ended on October 31st with the signing of this joint declaration between the Catholics and the Lutherans. And this is just how Rome speaks. The date of choosing October 31st was intentional and prophetic. The sign that we are to get from that alone is that Rome, together with the Lutheran Church, have declared Martin Luther wrong, and that the Protestant Reformation is over, and that now Rome has the ascendancy in the churches. It's diabolical, and it marks the very character of the ecumenical movement. And Rome picks these dates specifically to send a message that ecumenism now rules, that we are all to be subservient to the papacy, the biblical and historical Antichrist.